So the first thing we're going to do is, like we said, we're going to look at Johnathan Givony's top 100 prospects list. So it's his brand new big board that he's just updated. I'm going to go ahead. I got to do a little bit of maneuvering with that, Ethan. So while I do that, what are kind of just your overall thoughts on the draft prospects, kind of what the Spurs could do at both of those positions? I know you may be repeating yourself with all the other stuff that we've talked about, but just now that we're here, once again, another week of gathering information. Where are you at this week, Ethan?
I continue to feel great about our position in the draft, Jude. I mean, we have two picks at 4 and 8. We have a lot of directions that we can go. I think four is an optimal spot because it kind of takes away some of the difficulty behind like a top three pick. There's a little less pressure there because the Spurs have a lot of room to maneuver. Like we could draft a point guard, we could draft a wing, we could draft a big. Like there's really not like when you say like draft about need for the Spurs, we pretty much need everything. So that opens up all of these prospects as to potential selections for the Spurs. And having two at 4 and 8, two top 10 picks allows us to maybe take a big swing at an upside guy at that 8 spot, as well as address two positional needs. For me, obviously, that's going to be a point guard and a wing. Some people might disagree with that, but I think that's holistically where Spurs fandom is at right now. Is at right now.
Lot of things on the table as we have talked about throughout this offseason, Ethan, and not to repeat it every time, but it really all does tie back to Mr. Victor Wembanyama.
Right on.
But Ethan, look right here. We got Bronny James and Devin Carter, who
Mm.
is who we will be doing our prospect breakdown on after we go through this. So kind of fitting that he is in the thumbnail for the article here, if you will. Um, but once again, like you said, Ethan, lots of possibilities for the Spurs whenever it comes to the 4th and 8th picks, or if they want to move them, whatever ends up happening in late June. But let's jump in to this big board from Johnathan Givony. So it starts off with, of course, Zachary Rasache, the French forward from JL Borg, who has been having even more games in the playoffs, Ethan, where he's put up some good numbers. I saw a 21.8 rebound game recently, which I believe now JL Borg is in the semifinals. So still putting up numbers against even better teams. I believe they're facing Monaco, which was another team that Metropolitans 92 faced on their run to the LNB finals last year with Victor. And they're kind of another team similar to Cholet. So for him to have that performance against them, that was just another solid outing. But let's read what Givony has to say. Rasache's Borg's team advanced to the French playoff semifinals, where it will face number 1 seed Monaco, a top-level EuroLeague team that should provide a staunch challenge. Rasache had a career-best 28-point outing in Game 2 of the quarterfinals. That was the one we talked about last week. Putting his talent as a dynamic 6'10 shot maker and versatile defender with an elite feel for the game on full display. Now, what I'm going to stop here, notice he calls him 6'10. He hasn't been called 6'10 throughout, the entirety kind of this process. And I think as you'll see in this article, I'm going to be real. I'm just assuming a little bit here, but as you'll see in these in the next couple, well, just throughout the lottery prospects that we go through, he's going to mention their heights in shoes, which is their height on the court. So what I'm guessing is the reason he's referring to him as 6'10 now is because that is his height on the court in shoes. So that was one of the updated things in this big board. But just wanted to mention that because we haven't talked about that much. And that just once again adds to his versatility. And, when we talk about maybe the Wizards selecting him at number 2, if he's 6'10, yes, he might need to put on a little bit more weight, but that adds to him maybe even potentially being a 4 moving forward, which would make him fit next to Bilal Coulibaly very well.
Mhm.
Anyways, back to what Givony has to say. Rasache is in a group of prospects firmly in the mix for the Atlanta Hawks at number 1, sources say, and likely won't have to wait long to hear his name called, as he's in consideration for every team picking in the top 5. Rasache is slated to attend the NBA Global Camp in Treviso, Italy, starting on June 4th, where he'll go through combine-style testing, drills, interviews, and medical examinations. So I guess we'll really kind of maybe learn more about his height there, but maybe there have been some other measurements that we don't know about, but we'll see. Where he'll go through all that stuff, right? And though that might not materialize if Borg advances to the finals. So if he goes to the finals, he may not be able to go to that, just probably like Wemby wasn't able to last year. Rasache is expected to be selective with his pre-draft visits among NBA suitors once he finally does make his way to the States. Ethan, I just read all that. What are your thoughts on it?
No, obviously he's been playing a lot better. Being 6'10" makes him even more attractive than he already was. And for those of you that are like, oh, that's with shoes on, like you said, he plays the game on the court with shoes on, as does everybody else. But the past couple of, or I should say the last week, because it's been a week since we did our last pod, I think it's less likely now than it was even last week that he slips to us at 4, Jude. I don't know if you disagree, but if he is available at 4, I'm still all on the Rasache train for taking him at that 4 spot, especially since it's possible for us to get, say, a Stephon Castle at 8 because 5, 6, and 7 don't necessarily need point guards.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that, Ethan, because I've been seeing that a little bit more too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and when I say what I'm seeing a little bit more is him potentially falling to 4. I have been
Mm,
seeing that more. Or just, dropping a little bit. But I've seen that in like 2 different draft scenarios. And it's like a lot of it ties into some of the stuff that's going on right now. Reed Shepard is getting a lot of consideration for potentially the number 1 pick. But I
really?
think the combination that I would have to see, yes, that would have to go down in that scenario would probably be Alex Sarr, Reed Shepard, and then Donovan Clingan. I don't know how likely that is, but that's kind of what's gone down in the scenarios that I've seen. Um, yeah. Anyways, the point that I'm trying to get at, though, still the flip side, Ethan, is that he's also the number 1 prospect ranked on Gavoni's big board at the same time. So, while we are seeing a little bit more of that, maybe if a team wants to draft more for need, it just goes back to the conversation we had last week, Ethan. I hate to repeat myself, but I don't think Washington's in a position where they can really, draft for need. You could say Houston is for sure. But even then, he could fit with Houston a little bit, although they do have a good bit of wings on their roster already. Um, but then again, it's like if he falls to 3, Houston might be in a tough position of like, we're just going to pick this guy. Maybe they even want to play him at the 4. Granted, they already have Jabari Smith Jr. there. The more that I think about that, I kind of don't feel like Houston would be the place for him. I think they'd go with a guard before they would go with someone like him as I'm talking that out.
Right.
But still, it's the point I'm trying to get at is it's going to be hard for him to get through the first 3, even though I have seen more articles and smoke, if you will, on him potentially falling to 4. Like when you said you think that might be more of a possibility now, I completely agree with that. But still, as we're starting this off, he's the number 1 prospect. So
Mm. I think some of that also might just be the media and the whole fit around him being a French player to the Spurs next to Wembanyama. They might be trying just to shoehorn that in there. Because I also have a hard time believing the top 3 teams would pass up on Versace if he were available. Maybe not Atlanta because Sarr, I think, is ultimately going to be the number 1 pick. And I have a couple Houston friends that even think Houston might trade back if Versace is available at 3. That's a scenario that we really haven't talked about up until this point.
I didn't mention that. I had heard that from a friend as well, but I hadn't like really looked into it too much. So that was going through my brain when I was talking earlier, but I was like, I don't want to mention that because I don't know how sourced that is. But if you're hearing other people going through that, I think that that's probably something going around right now. And honestly, when you think about the Rockets and the position they're in, and also the Reed Shepard stuff I mentioned, if that
Hmm.
was somebody they were targeting at 3 and he's going to go at 1 or 2, that would give them a reason to back out.
Right.
But who knows what's going on? We'll just have to watch it all play out. But I have heard that potentially being a possibility as well. But any final thoughts on Rasache before we move on here, Ethan?
No, sir. I think we just about covered it.
Yes, sir. So here comes Alex Sarr, who I still think is, even though he's ranked at number 2 right here on Gavoni's big board, I think he's kind of a shoehorn to go into number 1. We'll see how it plays out, but I just feel like he's going to end up being the number 1 pick, even if Atlanta ends up trading it. But let's read this here. Sarr was ESPN's top ranked prospect to appear at the Combine and is on the short list of options for the Hawks at number 1 overall. He opted not to do a pro day in Los Angeles, typical for a top pick candidate, but it remains to be seen at this time which teams he will work out for going into draft night. It's probably because he's going to go number 1. His upside is arguably the highest of any of the draft prospects because of his considerable physical profile, measuring just under 7 foot barefoot at the Combine with a 7'4" 5.25 wingspan and a 9'2" standing reach. Has unusual mobility for his size. Notice they're still listing him at 7'1" here. I'm not exactly sure what he is in shoes, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's that. He also mentioned that being his height on Paul George's podcast. I just listened to that the other night, and that was actually really interesting to kind of hear from him in that perspective. But that aside, in addition to his considerable defensive potential, Sarr has the makings of a versatile offensive skill set, capable of running the floor and finishing plays, occasionally putting the ball on the floor with some shooting touch outside the arc or out to the arc. He still has development ahead of him in order to harness his abilities, leaving some room for potential downside if he doesn't progress as expected for a high pick. But the blueprint for an impactful starting caliber player is there. Ethan, we could probably jump into all of the intricacies of Alexander Sarr, um, but I don't really think that the Spurs are going to be in the market for getting him at number 4. But before we move on, what are your thoughts on what Gavoni said here about Alex Sarr? Just to say that.
I mean, 100% agree. I think it's consensus that he has the most potential of being a superstar player in this draft. However, even if he doesn't amount to anything, I think at minimum he is a very quality rim protector and athletic, versatile big that can just roll at the rim, catch lobs, and basically just be a super athletic, high level center for any team that's in need of one.
He's just the perfect modern big. I mean, I
Mhm.
say perfect. I know he there's still some things he can improve on, but his build, the prototype for the modern NBA, this is exactly what you want. They talked a lot about um, Victor, obviously, in that podcast with Paul George, as I mentioned. And it was just like, how are y'all 7-footers, learning to put the ball on the floor? And
Mm,
what he kind of talked about there was that because he was so big, like growing up, like he was always tall. He didn't just have, like a major growth spurt out of nowhere. He had to play with the guys that were older than him growing up because if he was playing with his age, it was just going to be too easy. So because of that, the guys he was playing with were actually bigger than him. So even though he was bigger for his size, whenever he would go play pickup with guys that are older than him, he would kind of have to put the ball on the floor. He'd be more of a guard. He wouldn't be the biggest guy on the court. So
right.
that's kind of what he said, contributed to him developing the abilities that he has. I'm not saying he's going to be Victor, but there are a lot of similarities whenever it comes to their build and their skill set, the way that they're able to, you know, uh, their mobility, their fluidity in their movement, and their defensive potential inside and on the perimeter is kind of what I'm getting at there, as well as the offensive skill set too. But I will say, obviously, it's not the same enigma as Victor, but still, shout out to France and what they're doing with their big men over there and how skilled they are.
100%. Shout out Boris Dio.
Yes, sir. Shout out Boris. Donovan Clingan is the next name on the list at number 3. Clingan has momentum going into June and has made a strong impression in the drills portion of the combine, private interviews, and his pro day, where he dropped intriguing glimpses of perimeter shooting that many scouts will feel to be part of his game in the not too distant future. That's interesting. I did see a couple threes on his highlights, Ethan, but other than that, I hadn't really heard too much about his perimeter shooting, so that's interesting to hear. His measurements, notice he's listed at 7'2" up there, but 7'3" in shoes, 282 pounds with a 7'7" wingspan, and an outrageous 9'7" standing reach are elite, as we already knew. The draft lottery did not do him too many favors, though, slating teams with entrenched starters at the center position at number 3, 4, and 5, which might drop him a little bit further than his big board ranking indicates. It would not be too surprising to see teams such as the Portland Trailblazers or the Memphis Grizzlies try to move up on draft night to snag their starting center of the future. There is some chatter, however, that Clingan has fans amongst the Hawks contingency at number 1, meaning there's a lot left to be played out between now and June 26th. I can see, obviously, Gavoni has more sources than we do, Ethan. And I'm
Hmm.
sure he did hear that, but I just can't see that happening. If the Hawks pick Donovan Clingan at number 1, I don't mean that even in a bad way because he's not a
Right.
bad player, but like that would just be crazy. What are your thoughts on that there?
I don't think it's going to happen. I've heard that too in the last week and a half. Like a lot of people had him at number one for some reason lately. I like Klingon. I still don't really think he's a top 3 player in this draft, to be completely honest with you. Like, I think he has his upside. I think he's a high level defender. Obviously, he's huge, incredible wingspan, 7'7", high IQ player as a passer out of the post and as a finisher in the post. But I just think he's not mobile enough really to warrant him being a top 3 pick. So if he's taken a number 1, then I am absolutely shocked to say the least.
I completely agree. And I just put up a comment. MEZ made a good point about the Trailblazers, even though Givony's mentioning them here. They have DeAndre Ayton, and I'm
And
forgetting
Robert Williams.
that was the other one. He said already two centers they're paying big money to. The Grizzlies, I could definitely see. I know they just moved off of Steven Adams, to
Right.
get a replacement there, and that
Right.
would be at 9. I could totally see that. But yeah, I guess as I've said, just to kind of put a Spurs spin on this, as we've talked about, if it works out to where I don't think this is going to happen. I think this is very unlikely that it's going to happen, but you never know with the draft. If all of the point guards are off the board or whatever prospect we really like, a lot of them, depending on what we do it for, a lot of this depends on that. But say we take, a forward that we like or a point guard we like, and then the rest of the position is just rated in the next couple picks. I would not be against drafting Donovan Clingan at 8 to basically replace Zach Collins.
Right. I would agree with that statement.
And, another thing that we'll get into a little bit later here, I don't know. I don't want to jump into it too fast. No, this is that must have been a different article. We're about to go to Reed Shepherd regardless, and there is some Spurs intel here.
Mm.
But what I was just about to say, Ethan, I forgot. So we're just going to move on to Reed Shepherd.
Reed Shepherd, baby.
Shepherd measured a little bigger than expected at 6'3" in shoes while testing a 42-inch vertical leap in Chicago. That was a big eyebrow raiser. He also looked like the clear-cut best shooter in the draft every time he had a ball in his hands, both at the Combine and his pro day in Los Angeles this week. Several teams have said that Shepherd's statistical profile, with his incredible scoring efficiency, these numbers are just ridiculous.
Yeah.
56% from the field, 52% from 3, and 83% from the line, combined with his excellent steal, block, and passing metrics that also show up on tape. It's not just the passing, it's not just the numbers. Have ranked him as the number 1 prospect in their draft models, something that has surely caught the attention of the analytically inclined front office, such as the Houston Rockets. That's
Mm.
why I've been mentioning him going to Houston for so long, and here you see it from Givony. But with the premium that NBA teams are increasingly placing on perimeter shooting, it's hard to see Shepherd dropping below the top 5 with his fit in San Antonio alongside Victor Wembanyama looking especially strong at the Spurs' number 4 pick. I know. If you've been watching this channel throughout the draft, when I started off, the first time I talked about Reed Shepherd, I said a lot of mean things. I said I didn't think his athleticism was going to translate. I didn't think that the things he was going to be able to do in college, or that he was doing in college, would be able to translate. And after that, I kind of repented and I said, hey, I was wrong about that. I've changed how I felt. And as the time has gone on, Ethan, I just get further and further away from my initial takeaways. And once again, for those of you guys who may not know about that saga, if you will, I watched the 2 games against Kentucky this year in full. And those were I didn't watch that many college games in full this year, so I put a lot of emphasis on them, and that was against
LSU versus
LSU. Right. And that was LSU versus Kentucky, where Reed Shepherd didn't have his best games and Rob Dillingham did have really good games. So that was where my knowledge base kind of came from. But as I dove into the rest of his tape, I just mentioned the insane efficiency that he has. And then on top of that, I'm talking about his athleticism, Ethan. I was proven way wrong on that. 42-inch vertical at the Combine on top of other stuff. His dad has here's an interesting stat about his dad. Shout out to Film Room. He's been in the comments before, and he told me this. Reed Shepherd's dad, I believe, okay, I'm butchering this completely, but it was either the Final Four or March Madness. When he played at Kentucky, his dad was a player at Kentucky. He
Mhm.
won an award in a tournament at San Antonio. I can't remember if it was
Mm.
March Madness or just some like kind of beginning of the year tournament that you see in college a lot.
Right.
I want to say it was March Madness, but y'all look that up. Reed Shepherd's dad won an award when he was at Kentucky when he was in San Antonio. So that was a little fun Spurs connection there. But
Mhm.
Ethan, that's my thoughts on Reed Shepherd. I've just gotten higher and higher on him, and to be honest with you, I kind of see why people are giving him number one consideration. Um, I still would have Alex Sarr and Versace ahead of him, personally, but at the same time, I think he's going to be a very solid NBA player. Like he's somebody that like he has such a high floor, and
Mhm.
really, I think his ceiling is as time has progressed for me has also been higher than I expected. But the main thing, like I said, I mean, he's one of the most sure things in the draft, in my opinion.
Now he's an excellent player, and I feel like we disrespect him a lot, not even intentionally, just because we don't talk about him that much when we do a lot of these draft profiles. And I think that's a couple reasons why we haven't, is because we were both pretty high on Rob Dillingham, who played with him at Kentucky and played point guard, as well as Stephon Castle, who's also a point guard. Um, and I don't know about you, Jude. I still would definitely take Stephon Castle over Reed Shepard, just in terms of fit, versatility, and what he would bring to our team defensively. But you can't deny what Reed Shepard's able to do. I mean, that efficiency is crazy at 56%, 52 from three. Um, I know he's got a lot of heart. A lot of people compared him to Derek White defensively. What he's able to do just out of sheer hustle at 6'3" with that frame. Um, but I wouldn't be upset if we took him at 4. I really wouldn't if he's available. I think Houston would take him at 3 if they don't trade back. Personally, I think that's just what would happen, and we would be left off with Castle or Dillingham, whoever at 4. Um, but if he's there, man, I don't know. I don't know. I think I still go. I think I still go Castle personally.
I have Shepard above Castle. I would rather take Shepard than Castle.
Wow.
And when I say this, like there's like a it's like this much of a difference. You know
Mm,
what I'm saying? Like and that's really with a lot of these guys. I would say maybe Rob's fell a little bit for me. Topich with the injury concerns, that's something, that's also a little bit of an interesting thing. But here's the thing with Shepard for me. I just think and this isn't even Stephon Castle's fault. But we've seen Shepard. I mean, and what's crazy now that I think about it, he kind of played the two a lot at times. But
hmm
still, the amount of playmaking and like straight up point guard tape, like when you watch it, you're like, that's a point guard play. He's running this out of a pick and roll. He's orchestrating the set. Like he's even if it's not just a set, he's orchestrating. Whatever assist ends up happening. Um, he's we've already seen what he can do at point guard where we haven't necessarily seen that from Castle. And as we've talked about in other episodes, that's not necessarily Castle's fault because of the role that he took on at UConn. Um, but because I've seen more from Shepard in that position, I don't think, the thing that I would give Castle is his frame. Castle has a better frame than Reed, but also the combine measurements and how he did in all the athleticism drills, if you will, stuff that whether that's his vertical, or whatever it may be, the way that he tested physically, that wiped away all of those concerns. It's still not like there's going to be a giant drop off. He's just not as big as Stephon. But the shooting splits, his playmaking ability, the defense, and the fact that, like I said, we kind of saw a little bit more flashes of that in his position. And also the fact that he was able to do that, like with all of these point guards. Like he comes in with Rob Dillingham, um, with number 12, Reeves. I'm forgetting his first name. I know Drew's in the chat. He already reminded me of it one episode a while back. And then DJ Wagner as well. Like he was the one who emerged. And when that class came in, if you had to rank, okay, who do you think is going to be a top pick? That was not Reed Shepard. And he also went on the podcast P with Paul George. And he talked about, he was like, it's so crazy that I'm getting number one consideration now because I just went into the season looking to have fun. And we talked about DJ Wagner and how high he was. He was basically in Reed Shepard's position preseason.
hmm
So I think the way that he performed and the flashes he showed, with all of the guards around him, and also, like Kentucky's a top tier program too. I know they weren't the same as UConn this year, obviously, but it's once again, all of this is really like it is not a giant difference. But me
Right.
personally, all of the things I just said, Antonio Reeves, thank you, Drew. Thank you, Drew. Um, that's why I have him a little bit higher than Castle personally.
I'm not mad at it, and I really can't argue against it. I think at the end of the day, it's about taste and then who's available. I mean, is really what it comes down to.
And I would also say that I think it's much more likely that Stephon Castle is available at 4 than Reed Shepherd. I mean, there's the Houston Rockets, and they're analytically inclined, and he's just popping off all the charts for all the analytics. As I've said this whole time, I really think that's what's going to happen. But if he is there at 4, I would, run to like Lou said with Stephon Castle, I would run to the the phone, whatever. I don't, we don't give him the pick. Actually, we call him, right.
I don't know how it works anymore, honestly.
I'm pretty sure. No, we definitely called him because Brian Wright. There was the video of Brian Wright saying Victor Wembanyama last year on the phone.
Right, that's right.
But any final thoughts on Reed Shepherd, Ethan?
I just want to pull this comment up real quick from Mike Ingles, throwing shade at Kentucky players in the playoffs. I think he's alluding to Carl Anthony Towns with that one.
Tyrese, though.
No, Tyrese Maxey.
Yeah, I was just
Yeah,
thinking about the heroics he had in some games, even though they ended up losing.
no, for sure, for sure, for sure. He is a Dallas Mavericks fan, hence the
Oh,
Carl
I
Anthony
see.
Towns hatred.
The slander. Yeah, he's in the
Well,
thick of the series right now. They're probably going to pull it out, but
Wolves in 7.
yeah. Remember we said Pacers in 7 last week?
Did I say that?
Yeah, but it was just it was obvious you were kind of joking about it.
Oh yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. I was gonna say I don't think I would have said that, but
MEZ says Kentucky guards under Calipari become better when they get to the NBA. He says Calipari is a terrible offensive coach. Um, I mean, I'm sure that over the past couple years you can criticize Calipari, but his track record also speaks for itself. But more importantly, the first part of your comment is 100% true. When Lou was on, we brought up the graphic of the comparisons between Rob Dillingham and Tyrese Maxey. Tyrese
Mhm.
Maxey was a sub 30% three-point shooter coming into the NBA, and we've seen what he's become since.
Right on. Yes, sir.
Drew also says that. He says Kentucky guards historically pan out well in the draft.
It's true.
But moving on from Reed Shepherd, here is Matas Buzelis, the small forward from the G League Ignite, who could also play the 4 at 6'10". Buzelis didn't participate in any agency pro day in Chicago, in an agency pro day in Chicago, but based on what we saw from him in private workout settings, he should have opportunities to help his standing in the coming weeks. He offers some of the prototypical qualities teams are looking for at forward with solid positional size, vertical bounce, developing offensive versatility, and better defensive acumen than scouts were expecting entering the season. His production at the G League level portends, what a word,
Mm.
room for growth. He settled in as the season went on, flashed shot making ability, and contributed in a range of areas. It's going to take Buzelis some time, and he'll need to continue packing strength onto his frame to handle both forward positions long term. But there's a baseline for him as a very useful NBA player, and upside for more than that if a team can be patient with him. And just to talk about his height there, he was measured at like 6'8.75, I'm pretty sure, without shoes. So in shoes, it would make sense that he's 6'10. But what are your thoughts on Matas Buzelis, Ethan?
He's good. I'm not super high on him at 8. If it's between him, Ron Holland, who else is at the wing spot? Cody Williams, uh,
Connect, maybe.
Connect. I think I take him last of those 4 guys personally. Uh, but again, I think it's a matter of taste. I have some friends that think he is a consensus top 5 pick, and they will hear no slander against Matas Buzelis. I have a hard time believing that. I think that they're really just fans of the name at the end of the day. But that's just my opinion.
Gotcha. I see somebody in the comments says Hito Turkaloo without the shot.
Yeah, oh man,
Oh
that's
my
tough.
goodness. And I see somebody else in the comments said who was 4. It was Reed Shepherd. Just going to scroll up for you there. But Matas Buzelis, I completely agree with you, Ethan. I mean, I'm not going to be mad if we pick him. I think he has a lot of potential, but at the same time, I think I would rank him last, kind of in that grouping too, personally. But also, like I said, I'm not going to be like, oh, this is a disaster if we pick him. I'm going to be like, okay, this will probably take some time, but he's also going to stir up that 3 spot for us and bring a bunch of size. Um, but yeah, at the same time, as they kind of say here, it's going to take Buzelis some time, and he'll need to continue packing on strength onto his frame to handle both forward positions long term. So Honestly, I wouldn't have him at 5 on my big board if I
Me
made one.
neither. Me neither.
Let's move on to somebody that we may potentially have at 5 on our big board, Ethan, and that is Stefan Castle. Notice this 6'7 now. That is
Mm.
something that has come out with the post draft measurements. Castle measured out better than expected in Chicago at a hair under 6'7 in shoes and shot surprisingly well in the drills, hitting 18 for 25 three pointers in the star shooting drill, tied for third best at the combine. NBA teams were hoping to see him replicate that performance at his pro day, but he elected to sit it out. Now, that's an interesting thing. That's obviously a political move. I think with as good as it went, they were like, hey, just don't do it. But I don't think that's just because he didn't do it. That's not, oh, he's scared to shoot. Like, that's
Mhm.
just, he had a really good shooting performance. They don't want to diminish that stock as every prospect kind of has to make business decisions like that in this position. But anyways, NBA teams were hoping to see him elected. Blah, blah, blah. After playing mostly as a complimentary wing option for the national champions UConn, Castle has told teams in private interviews he views himself as a point guard in the NBA. He also appears to be avoiding private workouts with teams that already have starting point guards in place, a strategy that might not be as effective as in the past, since every team in the top 15 has medicals because of rule changes implemented this year. Do you know what he's getting at there at the end, Ethan?
I really don't know.
Thank you. Okay. I'm glad that because I was reading that and I was like, what is he trying to what does the medicals have to do with him not doing workouts with point guards or
I
teams that
guess
already
when
have
when
point
you do
guards?
your private workouts, you also would do your medicals. So if you didn't do a workout, you didn't have the medicals. I guess that's what he's saying, but I think
Anyways,
the message is still clear.
yeah.
Like
Anyways, Ethan, thoughts on Stefan Castle?
I think we were both high on him from the start. However, we weren't like convinced completely, or at least I wasn't until we had Lou on. Shout out Lou. If you don't know who he is, go check him out in our last two videos ago, I think 2 lives ago. He's also very active on Twitter. But he has Stefan Castle ranked number one on his big board. He thinks we should take him at 4 if he's available without question. I tend to agree with him. Extremely versatile defender, has a lot of upside. Obviously, his shooting at the combine was better than a lot of people had expected it to be. Neither of us thought his jump shot was broken, but I think I was surprised to see that he shot that well at the combine. So that is obviously a positive direction for him. Um, he wants to play point guard. He has played point guard in high school, but elected to take a different role with UConn because of his desire to win and do whatever it takes to compete for a championship. So I like his mentality. I like his size. I like his versatility. If he's available, I think he fits well with the Spurs.
Yeah, I mean he's still high on if I had to rank my point guards, right? He's at least top 3. I actually made a little list here and when I look at it, I mean he's probably top 2 for me.
Mm,
Um but we're gonna get into the other guy that will also be on this big board list, but that's also in the title, and he's kind of turned some heads for me. That's Devin Carter, if you
mm.
guys don't know. But still, Stefan is one of my preferred out of like the handful of point guards that we could get. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes, sir.
We've talked about also, his defensive versatility. Lou talked about his versatility in general. We saw that at UConn, but with this measurement, we've already texted about this, Ethan. But when you think about Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and Luka Doncic, who are both 6'6", 6'7", this is the type of frame that would be optimal for the Spurs when it comes to having a point guard who can pick up those guys.
1000%. And it's kind of the polar opposite of the next guy we have on this big board.
Which is Rob Dillingham, of course. And, offensively, nothing has really changed, on my opinion, about Rob Dillingham. It's
Mm.
more just the defensive stuff and the size stuff and I don't want to say scaredness, the apprehension that he could potentially be a Bones Highland, or maybe even better than a Bones Highland, but like a Jamal Crawford. At the end of the day, he could end up just being a six man. That's kind of the thing that scares me a little bit with the defense. But offensively, everything that I've said about him, that hasn't changed for me. But let's read this. Dillingham is nearing a return to team workouts in mid-June as he recovers from an ankle injury that held him out of testing at the combine. He did go get measured, though. There's considerable upside and downside to selecting Dillingham early in the draft. He's one of the best available shot creators with shiftiness plus shooting capability off the bounce. But his physical traits, he stands just over 6'2" in shoes, 164 pounds. Ethan, like, I'm significantly heavier than that. Um, and I'm not even that big of a guy. Like, I was thinking about that the other day. With a 6'3" wingspan, traditionally haven't fared well for NBA success and render him a negative defender. His offensive gifts give him a chance to pan out as a full-time starter, but the drawbacks could make him better suited for a spark plug role off the bench, which isn't what teams are hoping for in a top 10 pick. The nature of the 2024 draft class has made Dillingham a consideration for teams at the top of the draft, but he remains a polarizing player among scouts.
I would agree with your first statement. Nothing really has changed for me on Rob Dillingham. I think that I've just re-cemented myself in my original thought process, which is defense is our first priority. And if that's the case, I would rather have Stefan Castle, at least at that fourth pick. However, I wouldn't be upset if he fell to 8 and we ended up getting both Castle and Rob Dillingham. I think that that is still a winning situation for the Spurs. It gives us kind of the yin and the yang at that point guard position. We could play them together as well. When Rob comes in off the bench in this situation, we could move Castle to the wing spot and they could coexist. And then additionally, my last point here, the defensive concerns for Rob. Um, I know it kind of negates what I just said a little bit, but there were a lot of
Go ahead.
comments in our last videos that were saying there are really no great offensive point guards that are good at defense, and they gave a list of examples, and I started to think about it, and they're kind of right. I mean, other
I know
than
exactly
Shea
what you're talking about.
Gilgeous-Alexander, but he's 6'7". Like, but a lot of the smaller guards, they're not necessarily they are defensive weaknesses. So that might not necessarily hinder his career in the same um, grandiose way that Givony has listed out here.
I think that's a great point, Ethan. But the other thing that I will say is there is an adjustment physicality wise
Hmm.
to the NBA. So
For
some of
sure.
the offensive things, you know, maybe you're not going to be able to finish through contact as much. And there were some shades of him sometimes, just missing kind of, I don't even know how to, missing layups at the rim, I guess is the way that I could describe it, whether that's in contact or just kind of being out of control, with the wide open layup. With
Right.
all of that being said, the upside for Rob Dillingham, once again, that has not changed for me. Like if everything translates offensively, he would be a nightmare in the pick and roll with Wemby. But that's kind of a big if at the same time. You just got to see how this stuff plays out. Honestly, Ethan, I would rather if we pick Castle at 4 and Rob Dillingham's there at 8, I think I'd rather go with somebody else. I'd rather go. Like if we're gonna pick a point guard, I don't really want to double up on point guards. I know Lou talked about that, but with Blake Wesley, and Trey Jones
True.
still here, like I just don't. That's just not real. I would rather address both needs. And so if we pick Castle at 4, I mean, as much as I do agree with Lou with what we saw from Stephon Castle at UConn, that we could totally make that work. I think also Castle wants to be a point guard. And if we're going to pick him, let's just put him there. And once again, the defensive stuff that I just talked about with teams in our division, I would rather just go with a wing at 8 instead, like a Cody Williams or something. Um, but if we end up going with a wing at number 4, even though that, is potentially unlikely, him at 8, I would be very happy with.
Mm. I can't disagree with that.
But there, I mean, and as you guys have known as you've watched this channel, there's a lot of combinations that me and Ethan would be happy with. And that just ties into the fact that the Spurs have not been in this position for most of our lives.
On God, my friend.
Here is Dalton Connect at number 8. And this is something else that's interesting because he was measured at 6'5" and like 2.5 at the combine, which I was like, okay, he's a little bit smaller. But here's the thing, he's 6'6" in shoes. So that's what matters here. Connect is set to complete his unlikely climb from an older, off-the-radar prospect to a top 10 pick, with teams viewing him as a bankable wing scorer who is ready to contribute NBA minutes right away. I messed up the wording there, but it's basically the same thing. He brings legit positional size at 6'6" in shoes with a 6'9" wingspan, 3-level scoring ability, and the skill set to be a shooting threat playing off the ball. Connect isn't going to be a very good defender, at least not immediately. I like how he says at least not immediately because there are some flashes. You can go watch his tape. He had a lot of blocks this past season. It's not necessarily his strength, but there's also like you can go find 2 to 3 minutes of tape of him making good offensive plays, or excuse me, defensive plays. But his lack of high level experience prior to landing at Tennessee, as well as his impressive production there, creates a degree of intriguing upside, even for a prospect who's already 23 years old. Teams expect him to come off the board in the lottery. Here's the thing that I'll say before I dish it to you, Ethan. But his lack of high level experience prior to landing at Tennessee, as well as his impressive production there, creates a degree of intriguing upside, even for a prospect who's already 23 years old. They're different players, they're different positions, but this is Derek White. That's literally what this is. Derek White played 1 year at Colorado. And like I just said, I prefaced that like I don't mean like in play style. I just mean in this sentence. They were both 23 when they got drafted. They both had to work their way up from like junior colleges to, it was a D2 University of Colorado, Colorado Springs for Derek. And then of course the Buffaloes. I forget who Dalton Connect was with last year. I think it was a mid-major, so I think he did go D1 for 2 years, but still, the story and the parallels in their story, as well as them both being 23, are very similar.
I like Dalton Connect. That's a great point that you just brought up about Derek White. That is very much a similar storyline and journey for those two players. But I think Dalton Connect at 8 as a wing, 6'6", that is a 3-level scorer to help provide much needed help off the bench as far as off the ball spacing, shooting, and just to go get you a bucket from time to time when Keldon Johnson doesn't have it rolling or Malachi Branham is in a shooting slump. I think that is definitely a need for the Spurs. I would not be upset if we drafted him there. And his poor defense or not a very good defender, I would call it capable defender is how I would label him. Not a very good defender feels a little bit harsh, especially considering what I saw from his tape.
I completely agree, Ethan. Next up is Nikola Topic, who would probably be a lot higher up here, Ethan, if he didn't have another knee injury. So I'll just jump
Right.
right into that. Topic's season ended with a knee injury suffered in the Adriatic League Finals, his second in this calendar year, a development that will be studied closely by teams once NBA doctors are able to conduct a thorough physical examination. Several teams have pointed out that European doctors often have different philosophies from their American counterparts regarding ligament injury treatment, as well as their likelihood for recommending surgery. So it's all but a certainty that his MRIs will be scrutinized closely and might have an impact on his draft stock if his availability for next season comes into question. Topic's playmaking prowess as a 6'7" pick and roll maestro with possibly the fastest processing speed of any prospect in this draft should help overcome those question marks as he was gaining momentum for consideration as one of the draft's top prospects before his season was derailed. I mean, just to add on to that, there were multiple mock drafts I saw of the Wizards picking him at number 2 a month ago.
Yeah, definitely a guy a lot of people had higher on their draft board than 9, including you and me. I remember we were discussing getting him at 4 and wondering if he would even be available at that spot. I like his size. I like his ingenuity, getting to the rim, finishing at different angles, and obviously his playmaking ability. The injury scares me personally. I think I would side on the side of caution. Is that how you say it? I would
Yeah.
wait on the side of caution. I would be cautious. I would rather get Stephon Castle or Reed Shepard or even Rob Dillingham if it came down to it.
Interesting. I think what give like the whole paragraph, the first one where they talk about the differences with the European doctors, I think that is key context. But also 2 injuries like this in a calendar year, it's gonna derail your draft stock, unfortunately.
Mhm.
It didn't matter who was in that position. That
For
would be the
sure.
result of that. You're gonna fall a little bit if that happens. But he did lead his team to the finals, or I say lead. I don't know if he necessarily led, because even in the tape that you see, he kind of plays his role, but still was a part of a team that made it to the finals. So you want to give him credit there. And also, he's a very young prospect as well. So even if it did, cut into some potential playing time this year because he's still 18. He is going to turn 19, I think, in around August, but still one of the younger players in the draft. That could maybe be the flip side of him sitting out some time this year. But still, I agree with your overall sentiment there, Ethan. And that will bring us to number 10, which is where we're going to end up stopping today, actually. I know there's some other names down here. I'm just going to scroll through them for the time being so y'all can see them, because we said we were going to go through all this, but we're already at almost like 50 minutes here, Ethan. And we still got a prospect profile to do. And one of them is Devin Carter, so it might be good. Well, there is some Spurs stuff here. We'll jump into that. We'll jump back to this when we go in the Devin Carter prospect profile, but it's kind of good that it works out that way because we can save that for later. But let's talk about Tijan Salon, who there has been a lot of smoke with the Spurs potentially picking at number 8, and here he is now at number 10 on Givony's big board. Following a strong stretch of play to end his season in France, Salon has created real lottery momentum going into June. A 19.8 rebound showing against a quality Paris team in the playoffs helped highlight his considerable potential. He showcased physicality, three-point shooting, that's why I harped on that during the prospect breakdown, Ethan, and competitive motor, which all bode well for his chances of eventually filling a valuable role at the next level. Salon, who is also still 18 and turns 19 in August, like Nikola Topic, offers untapped ability and a strong baseline for a combo forward at the NBA level, though it might take another year or two for him. Let me adjust this real quick. For him to emerge as a consistent contributor. It's hard to find players in any draft with his combination of qualities, which should help to stabilize him as an early selection in this class. With his season over, he will also measure and participate in drills and interviews in the NBA Global Camp in Treviso, Italy next week, before making his way to the US for team workouts.
I really like him. I think he is a raw project player, somebody that we could take a swing on at 8. He has a lot of potential. Very versatile player. Again, can play power forward at 6'10", offers a size, and like you said, the shooting that you continually harped on during his profile. I think for me, what it comes down to is if you're going to take a big swing on a guy that's a year from being away, I would rather take Cody Williams for one reason and one reason only. Um, we don't have a super young player at small forward. We do have Jeremy Sohan at power forward. We even have Mamu at power forward if we re-sign him. Right now, I guess
Barlow.
we have Barlow. I know we have Keldon Johnson at small forward, but I think he's a little bit older at this point in his career. And then what's our other small forward? It's Julian Champagny. So I think that's more of a need right now than Salon, if that's how you pronounce it, I believe, Salon.
Yes, yes.
Um, However, I wouldn't be mad at all if this is who we selected at 8.
Yeah. I mean, there's some more sure things. And this really, once again, this ties into who we selected for.
Mm-hmm.
Having those 2 picks, we're really going to play off that 4th pick, I feel like, Ethan. I'm not going to be mad if we pick him at 8, but I'm also not going to be mad if we go with a Dalton Connect, a Ron Holland, a Cody Williams, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly my point.
Well, we are going to go ahead and wrap up the big board right there, guys.